I'll leave at dawn, Eleanor Vance said softly, her voice steady, even though her heart felt like it might break in two. The words hung in the warm air of the small cabin, mixing with the smell of burning wood and fresh coffee that had gone cold on the table. Outside, the Montana wind moved across the open land like a warning, pushing against the wooden walls and rattling the loose shutter by the window. Snow covered the ground in a pale sheet that stretched as far as the eye could see, cold and endless. Eleanor stood near the door with her two children close to her sides. Lily pressed her face into her mother's skirt, small hands clutching tight. Thomas stood straight beside her, trying to look older than his 16 years, trying to be the man of the family, the way he thought he should be. Eleanor felt their fear like it was her own breath. Yet, Jedediah Stone stood across from them near the hearth. His broad shoulders filled the small room. His dark hair was a little too long, his jaw tight, as if he had not smiled in years. He looked at Eleanor the way a man looks at a storm rolling in over his land. Not with hate, not even with anger, but with hesitation. She had traveled 3 weeks by train and wagon to reach this homestead outside of Fort Benton. 3 weeks of hope. 3 weeks of telling her children that a new life was waiting, that a good man had written kind letters that this land would be home. Jedediah's letters had been careful and honest. He had written about hard winters and long days. He had written about losing his wife, Sarah, to fever 3 years ago. He had written that the ranch needed a woman's care and that he needed someone willing to build something steady and true. He said he had promised respect. Eleanor had answered with her own truth. She was a widow. She had 2 children. She had no family left in Iowa. She did not want saving. She wanted partnership. When his reply came saying he understood and still wished for her to come, she believed it with all her heart. But now, standing in front of him, she could see the doubt in his eyes. "I thought you might arrive later in the spring," Jedediah said quietly, rubbing a hand over the back of his neck. "Winter's harsh out here. We had no money to wait," Eleanor answered gently. It was now or never. Silence filled the space between them again. The fire cracked behind him. Outside, a horse shifted in the stable. Jedediah looked at the children. His gaze lingered on Lily's thin coat and Thomas's worn boots. Something moved in his face, and something close to regret, but it passed quickly. "This life is not easy," he said. "It asks more than most folks can give." Eleanor straightened her shoulders. Asterisk, I did not come here for easy. Asterisk, her calmness seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. He had expected pleading, maybe tears. But Eleanor had none to offer. She had used up her tears the day her first husband was lowered into the ground after a logging accident. Since then, she had learned how to hold herself together for her children. Jedediah stepped closer to the fire, as if the warmth might help him speak clearer. "I don't know if I can do this again," he admitted. "Bringing someone into this house, letting them build roots here. I buried my wife out past that fence. Every morning I see that cross." Eleanor's heart softened at that. A grief recognized grief without needing long words. "I am not asking you to forget her," she said quietly. "I would never ask that." His eyes lifted to hers then, surprised by the gentleness in her tone. "But I cannot beg to stay," she continued. "If your heart is not certain, I will not force it." Thomas shifted beside her. "Ma, it's cold outside," he whispered. She squeezed his hand. "I know, sweetheart." Jedediah looked between them again, conflict written across his face. He had written those letters during lonely nights when the house felt too large and too empty. It had seemed simple then. Words on paper were easier than real faces standing at his door. "You can stay tonight," he said finally. "There's food enough. The storm's picking up." Eleanor nodded once. "Thank you." That evening passed in quiet tension, but Eleanor helped cook supper, moving through the kitchen as if she had always belonged there. She tied her sleeves back and worked without complaint. Lily sat near the fire with a small carved wooden bird. Thomas followed Jedediah outside to help carry wood, eager to prove himself useful. Jedediah watched the boy carefully. Thomas did not complain about the cold. He carried what he could, even when his arms shook. Jedediah remembered being that age, wanting approval from a father who had been too stern to give it. Inside, Eleanor wiped the table clean and looked around the room. The house was solid, but lonely. Dust gathered in corners. The curtains were plain and faded. It was a home that had stopped trying. Later, when the children slept on a small bed near the hearth, Eleanor lay awake staring at the ceiling beams, and the wind cried outside like a restless spirit. She thought of the long road behind them and the uncertain one ahead. She would not let her children see her break again. If they had to leave at dawn, they would leave with dignity. Across the room, Jedediah sat at the table with his hat resting beside him. The lamp cast shadows across his face. He watched Eleanor from a distance, careful not to let her notice. She looked tired, but strong, not fragile like he had feared. He told himself it was better this way. Better to stop it before feelings grew, better than risking another grave behind the house. But when he imagined the three of them stepping into the snow before sunrise, something tightened in his chest. The homestead had been silent for 3 years, too silent. He had grown used to the quiet, had told himself he preferred it. Yet the sound of children's breathing near the fire did not feel like trouble. It felt like life. Near midnight, he stepped outside. The sky was dark and wide. Stars scattered like broken glass. The cross near the fence stood covered in snow. He walked toward it slowly. "I don't know what I'm doing," he murmured to Sarah's grave. "I'm scared of losing again." The wind answered with a low howl. Back inside, Eleanor finally drifted into shallow sleep. Dawn came pale and cold. The storm had passed, leaving the land bright and cruel in its beauty. Eleanor rose quietly and dressed the children. She wrapped scarves around their necks and buttoned coats with steady fingers. Thomas looked up at her. "Are we leaving?" "Yes," she said softly. "We are strong enough." Lily's lip trembled, but she said nothing. Eleanor lifted their single worn bag, yet she took one last look at the room that might have been home. She would not cry here. Her hand reached for the door latch. Before she could turn it, heavy boots crossed the floor behind her. The door did not open outward. It was pulled shut firmly from the inside. Eleanor turned slowly. Jedediah stood there, breath uneven, eyes shadowed from a sleepless night. He placed his hand flat against the door, as if guarding it from the world beyond. "You're not walking into that cold," he said, voice low but steady. Eleanor lifted her chin. "We will manage." He shook his head once. "No." The word was not harsh. It was certain. He looked at Thomas and Lily, then back at Eleanor. Something had shifted in him, something stronger than fear. "I won't let you leave alone," he said quietly. The morning light slipped through the window, touching his face. For the first time since she arrived, Eleanor did not see hesitation there. She saw decision, and the silence between them felt different now. The silence in the cabin felt fragile, like thin ice over deep water. Eleanor kept her hand on the satchel, her fingers tight around the worn strap. She had prepared herself for goodbye. She had built a wall around her heart before the sun even rose. Now Jedediah stood between her and the door, and she did not know whether to feel anger or hope. "You said it was complicated," she reminded him, her voice calm, but guarded. "You said the timing was wrong." Jedediah swallowed. The morning light made the lines on his face look deeper. "I was wrong." The words seemed to cost him something. Eleanor searched his face looking for pity. She would not accept pity, but what she saw instead was struggle, real and honest. "I was afraid," he continued. "Afraid of failing you. Afraid of failing them. I built this homestead with my own hands after my wife died. Every fence post, every stall. I told myself if I kept working, I wouldn't have to feel the empty parts." His eyes dropped to the children. "When you showed up, it wasn't what I expected. Not because of the children, but because it felt real. And real things can be lost." Thomas stepped slightly in front of his mother, without meaning to. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "We know about loss," she said quietly. Jedediah nodded once. He believed her. Outside, the world looked still and white. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray line. It was a morning that could begin something or end something. "I meant what I said last night," Eleanor added. "I will not beg to stay where I am not wanted." "You are wanted," Jedediah said quickly, almost too quickly. Then he softened his tone. You just caught me before I was ready. Eleanor let that sit between them. Ready? She had not been ready either when her first husband walked into the forest and never came back. Life did not wait for readiness. Being ready doesn't change the cold, she said. It doesn't change the need for work or the weight of raising children. No, he agreed. But it changes whether a man stands alone or not. The fire behind them cracked loudly, as if breaking the last of the tension. Lily tugged at Eleanor's skirt. Mama, are we staying? Eleanor looked down at her daughter's wide eyes. She had promised these children stability, not another uncertain road. That depends, Eleanor answered gently, lifting her gaze back to Jedediah. If we stay as equals. I will not live in a house where I am only tolerated. Jedediah stepped away from the door slowly. He removed his hat and held it in both hands. If you stay, he said, choosing each word with care. You stay as family, not as charity, not as a mistake. His voice grew rough. I cannot promise I will do everything right. I am not good with soft words, but I will not let fear make decisions for me anymore. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. She saw a man who had spent years fighting loneliness by pretending he preferred it. She saw a man who worked hard but had forgotten how to hope. And what about her? Eleanor asked gently. Your wife. Jedediah's jaw tightened, but he did not look away this time. Her name was Sarah, he said. She would have hated this house being so quiet. The honesty in that answer broke something open between them. Thomas slowly relaxed his shoulders. Lily stepped closer to Jedediah, curiosity overcoming fear. Do you have animals? Lily asked in a small voice. Jedediah blinked, surprised. Edo. What kind? Horses, cattle, 2 stubborn goats. Lily's eyes widened just a little. Can I see them? Eleanor almost smiled despite herself. Jedediah glanced at Eleanor for permission. She gave a small nod. He stepped aside from the door fully. Now get your coat. It's still cold. Thomas moved first, pulling on his gloves quickly. Lily followed, her earlier sadness replaced with cautious excitement. Eleanor remained where she was for a moment. You understand this will not be easy, she said quietly once the children were busy. I know, Jedediah replied, but sending you away would not be easy either. She felt the truth of that in her bones. Outside, the snow crunched beneath their boots. The homestead spread wide around them, fences cutting lines across the white land. The barn stood strong against the morning sky. Jedediah walked beside Thomas, pointing out the corral and the well. Thomas listened closely, asking small but serious questions. Yet Jedediah answered each one without impatience. Eleanor watched them from a short distance. Something inside her chest, tight for so long, loosened slightly. Lily laughed softly when one of the goats nudged her mittened hand. The sound carried across the yard like a bright note in a quiet song. Jedediah froze for half a second at the sound, as if laughter had become unfamiliar to him. He looked at Eleanor, then really looked at her. I didn't expect them to feel like this, he admitted. Like what? She asked. Like they belong here. Eleanor folded her arms against the cold. Children know when a place has room for them. Jedediah nodded slowly. They returned to the house when the wind picked up again. Inside, warmth wrapped around them. Thomas helped hang the coats. Lily knelt by the fire. But Eleanor set the satchel down on the table instead of near the door. It was a small movement, but it meant something. Jedediah noticed. Stay through the winter, he said after a moment. Let's start there. We'll see how we manage together. No promises beyond honesty. Eleanor considered the offer. It was careful, but not cowardly. And if we manage well? She asked. Then we build from that, he replied. She stepped closer to the table and rested her hands on the back of a chair. I will work beside you, she said. I can cook, mend, keep accounts. I'm not afraid of long days. I believe that, he answered quietly. The children's voices drifted through the room, softer now. The house no longer felt like a place waiting for ghosts. Jedediah moved toward the window and looked out at the open land. For the first time in years, the view did not feel empty. Eleanor watched him carefully. This only works if we trust each other, she said. He turned back to her. Then we start with trust. She nodded once. The agreement was simple. No grand speeches, no dramatic promises, just two tired adults choosing courage over fear. But as the morning light filled the cabin, Eleanor felt something she had not allowed herself in a long time. Hope. And Jedediah, standing near the window, felt it, too, though he would not yet name it. The homestead had been silent for too long. Now it held the sound of children's footsteps, and that changed everything. Winter did not grow softer just because hope had entered the house. The days that followed tested every quiet promise Eleanor and Jedediah had made that morning. The wind came hard across the plains, driving snow against the barn doors, and the cattle grew restless. Water buckets froze solid before noon. Life on the homestead demanded strength every single hour. Eleanor rose before sunrise each day. She kept the fire alive through the night and had coffee ready when Jedediah stepped in from the cold. She learned the rhythm of the house quickly, mending torn coats, stretching flour into enough bread for 4, keeping the small space warm and steady. Thomas followed Jedediah like a shadow. He carried tools, asked questions, listened more than he spoke. Jedediah showed him how to check fence lines and how to read the sky for weather changes. He corrected the boy gently when mistakes were made, not with harsh words, but with patience that surprised even himself. Lily filled the quiet places. She hummed while Eleanor worked, yet she left small pine cones on the windowsill and asked endless questions about the horses. Jedediah answered her with short replies at first, unsure how to speak to a child who trusted him so easily. But each day, her presence felt less like a guest and more like part of the land. Eleanor watched it all carefully. She did not rush closeness. She did not pretend everything was settled. She understood that trust grew slow, like roots beneath frozen soil. One afternoon, as the sky turned gray with another coming storm, Eleanor found Jedediah standing near the fence at the edge of the property. The wooden cross marking Sarah's grave stood covered in frost. She walked toward him quietly. "I did not mean to intrude," she said gently. "You're not," he answered without turning. For a moment, they stood side by side in silence. "I still talk to her," he admitted, "mostly when I'm unsure." Eleanor nodded. "That is not weakness." He looked at her. "Then does it trouble you?" She shook her head. "No, love does not disappear just because life moves forward." The simple truth of her words settled between them like calm after wind. That night the storm arrived harder than expected. Snow piled high against the barn. One of the younger calves went missing during the evening check. Jedediah prepared to head back out alone, pulling on his heavy coat. "I'm coming," Eleanor said firmly. "It's too cold," he replied. "So is losing livestock," she answered. There was no fear in her eyes, only resolve. They left the children inside with strict instructions to stay near the fire. The wind cut across their faces as they searched the far side of the pasture. Snow reached past their boots, slowing every step. At last, they found the calf caught near a broken section of fence, trembling and weak. Jedediah worked to free it, while Eleanor shielded the animal from the wind with her body. Her hands grew numb, but she did not step back. When they finally guided the calf toward shelter, Jedediah looked at her with something new in his expression. Respect. Back inside, both of them were soaked and shivering. Eleanor laughed softly as she pushed wet hair from her face. "We did not lose him," she said. "No, we didn't." Thomas stared at them with wide eyes. "You look like warriors." Eleanor smiled at her son. "Sometimes survival feels like battle." Later, after the children slept, Jedediah placed a small wooden box on the table. Inside was Sarah's wedding ring. "I kept this because I did not know what else to do with it," he said quietly. "But holding on to it like this has kept me standing still." Eleanor did not reach for the ring. She did not need to. "You loved her," she said. "That does not end." "No," he agreed. "But I think it's time I stop living like everything ended with her." He closed the box gently and set it aside. "I don't know what we are yet," he continued, "but I know I do not want you walking away when spring comes." The honesty in his voice left no room for doubt. Eleanor felt tears rise, not from sorrow, but from relief. "I did not cross half the country to leave the first thaw." He let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like laughter. Spring did come, slow and stubborn. Snow melted into muddy earth. Green pushed through the ground in fragile lines. The homestead looked different under the warmer sun. So did the house. Curtains were washed and replaced. Laughter filled the rooms more often than silence. Thomas grew stronger, his confidence steady under Jedediah's guidance. Lily learned to braid a horse's mane with careful hands. Eleanor stood on the porch one evening, watching the land glow gold under the setting sun. Jedediah stepped beside her. "You were ready to walk away that morning," he said. "Yes, and I almost let you, but you didn't." He nodded. "No, I didn't." He looked at her then, not with hesitation, not with fear, but with certainty. "This is your home," he said simply. "All of you." Eleanor felt the weight of those words settle deep and sure, not as a promise made from loneliness, not as a decision born from panic, but as truth. She reached for his hand, and this time neither of them hesitated. The wind moved gently across the open fields. No longer a warning, but a song carried over new beginnings. The homestead that once felt like a place of endings now held something steady and strong. And the woman who had once said she would leave at dawn no longer stood near the door. She stood at the center of a home she helped build.